gentlemen, my distinguished colleagues and friends. Thank you very much for the introduction, Alessandro, and that I can have this talk. As has been said, I work in the Center for Classical Studies at the Institute of Philosophy at the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague, where I have two main research tasks. One is the creating of the dictionary of the medieval Latin in the Czech lands, and the other is research of medieval Latin texts dealing with meteorology and weather forecasting, especially those written in Central Europe. I focus on this topic mostly in the context of weather knowledge, weather interpretation, and its language and terminology. So I'm a philologist, but I work at the intersection of philology, history, natural philosophy, and natural sciences. And I see and use philology mainly as a key to understanding the Middle Ages, its knowledge, and so on. I also like the interdisciplinarity, and that's why comets are a great topic, because they were often understood, as we shall see, as meteorological objects of astrological significance. And they were the subject of diverse texts from different disciplines. I hope you hear me okay. It's all fine? Yeah, good. And if I should briefly sum up how I got to the topic, actually it was my master thesis where I wanted to trace and analyze the meteorological sources from the Czech lands in order to get a picture of medieval meteorology here, to see what ideas there were about meteorological phenomena, what the level of knowledge was, who was involved, if anyone. And the topic turned out to be very interesting, actually, as meteorology was taught at the University of Prague. It was one of the compulsory subjects. Both Latin translations of Aristotle's Meteorologica were available here, together with several commentaries on this work. Meteorology was also subject of medieval encyclopedias. It was discussed at the university quadrilateral disputations. I just find out that there is a lot of interesting material to analyze, and a lot of it accessible just in the manuscripts. And as I was digging into these texts, I also started to address the question of weather forecasting when there were no forecasting models, no synoptic maps, and so on. Because in fact, weather forecasting was not the subject of meteorology as it is today. It was a subject of different texts than the meteorology proper, which was a science of the nature and origin of the phenomena and was based on Aristotle's theories, which arose from the need to explain why in the heaven everything seems regular. The planets move in cycles, nothing really changes. But on the earth and around it, the world is a subject of constant and irregular change. Hence, as you know, Aristotle came up with the theory of two distinct areas, two distinct worlds. And now I can't move to... So now I would like to switch the slide and it doesn't work.
Are you should be able to move the...
I should be able, right? But I'm not. As we tried it before, so maybe I stop sharing and start again.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Stop share. Oh, yeah, now it works. You'll see it, right? The presentation. Okay. So he came up with the theory of the two distinct worlds, the supra-lunar one being made up of one element, ether, and the sublunar world made up of 4 elements. Next, he needed to find some system for explaining the origin of the phenomena in the sublunary region and decided for the theory of 2 exhalations. These 2 exhalations are released from the Earth's surface by the sun. The first is the vapor, which makes rain, dew, and so on. That's this wet exhalation vapor. And the second is a dry and hot exhalation, which makes winds, meteors, and what is important, also comets, and so on. So the meteorological phenomena are, as Aristotle and subsequent meteorology until 17th century has it, those which arise in this lower region from these 2 exhalations. But what is not really investigated in the meteorology is the primary cause of these phenomena and the question of weather forecasting. The question of forecasting, it is weather forecasting. Aristotle, in fact, gives in Meteorologica only a few signs of the coming weather, and just in the case they support his meteorological theories. And this dichotomy led me to dedicate my master thesis to meteorology, whereas in my PhD I focused on weather forecasting, which is also a nice and big topic because the weather forecasting in the Middle Ages was not just an astrological prediction, as one might think, but was quite varied, as we can see on this slide. For example, there are many texts with rules on prognostication from thunder in different months, such as if it thunders in January, it will be windy, there will be plenty of crops and war, etc. Or there are rules on prognostication from the day of the week on which the beginning of the year falls, January calends or Christmas Day. There was also a short-term weather forecasting. Here are the changes in weather deduced from phenomena and natural events observed at a certain place and at the moment mostly immediately preceding the change. One should observe, for example, the behavior of various animals and certain atmospheric phenomena such as fog on the hills, gathering the clouds, and so on. Other methods documented from the Middle Ages can be included in the category of divination. For example, there is a Latin text from the 15th century giving instructions for determining the months of the year in which it will rain the most, based on the reaction of salt to moisture on the first night of January. For this purpose, the text says, a wild bowl or a log should be placed in the cellar or some secret place. 12 heaps of salt placed in the hollows of this container, and the names of all 12 months should be pronounced. And then in the next morning, it should be checked which heap of salt yielded the most water, since in the corresponding months it would rain the most, and which would yield the least in that month there would be less rain. And the fact is that salt reacts to the moisture in the air by dissolving, and the amount of water absorbed depends on the amount of salt in each pile. So the more salt, the more moisture appears. The last method is predicting political affairs, crops, wells, and weather from the various marks, lines, colors, and depressions on a boiled sheep's shoulder blade. This method is attested with variations in many cultures from old China through Africa and the Americas to medieval Europe, where it came from the Arab upward. And in some texts are as weather indicators used also comets, and that's what I would like to focus on today. People back then were fascinated by comets, partly sure because there wasn't such a light pollution as today, but also because they didn't exactly know where they came from and whether, or maybe rather what, they portended. We all know what the comets are, right? I mean, according to today's knowledge. But if I should summarize it, comets, as we know it today, are large objects made of frozen gases and dust. They are, in fact, dusty cosmic snowballs that orbit the sun, and their origin or home is believed to be in the remote regions of space behind the orbits of the planets. And it is the gravity of a planet or a star that can pull the comet out of its home, allowing the comet to approach the sun. And when this comet gets close to the sun, it starts heating up and the ice begins to turn to gas. And this gas, together with the dust, creates a huge cloud around the core. This is the coma. It is also pushed by the solar wind into a bright tail that stretches behind the comet for millions of kilometers. Actually, astronomers find out that there are two separate tails, but let's leave these details aside now. In any case, some comets are periodic and return at regular intervals, but most of them have very, very long orbital periods and are visible just once here in the inner solar system. If we get back to Aristotle, for him a comet is a subject of meteorology. But the thing is that a comet moves with some regularity and with a circular motion, which speaks for the fact that a comet is more a celestial phenomenon. That's why some Greek philosophers therefore claim that a comet is a conjunction of a planet with a star or other planet. Others suppose it is a planet with a long period of revolution. And according to others, a comet itself is a planet, but the tail is not a part of it. Rather, it is a meteorological effect caused by a reflection like a halo or a rainbow. Among the Latin authors, it was Seneca in particular who argued that comets are mobile celestial bodies. On the other hand, Aristotle says that a comet cannot be a planet because all planets are visible in the zodiac, while many comets appear outside of it, and many of them disappear before they set. So their behavior differs from that of the planets, and they also differ from each other. And sometimes several comets have been observed at the same time, he says. According to him, the comet must be a meteorological sublunary phenomenon, which arises from dry exhalations dissolved from the Earth by the sun and ignited under special conditions. In fact, Aristotle describes two possible ways comets can form. You can see in this picture, which I borrowed from a book on the history of ideas on comets by an American professor, Haidarzadeh. I'm not sure I read it correctly. So a comet can be just a gathered exhalation that ascended from the Earth into the upper part of air, where it got ignited. That is this independent comet, non-dependent comet. Or there can be a comet when some fixed star or a planet attracts and gathers the exhalations. And when we look at the star through this accumulated exhalation, we see a comet with a tail, which, I mean, the tail is not really connected with this star or planet, but originates in the sublunar region and shares the motion with the generating star or planet. This second theory is not quite clear, and the truth is that the medieval followers of Aristotle have tended to avoid it. Aristotle also says that the kind of comet varies according to the shape which the exhalation happens to take. If it is diffused equally on every side, the star is said to be a long-haired star or a comet, cometes. If it stretches out in one direction, it is called bearded, pogonias in Greek. And what is important, in one section he says that the fact that comets foreshadow wind and draft must be taken as an indication of their fiery and elementary nature, for their origin is due to the plentiful supply of the hot and dry exhalation. Interesting is that for Seneca, on the other hand, the fact that the comet is an indicator of the weather is more a sign that it is of celestial nature. In any case, the idea that comets herald dry and windy weather was apparently widespread. We find a similar assumption in texts with rules for predictions. For example, in Pseudo-Theophrastus' De Signis, comets are signs of wind, drought, and cold weather. In Aratus' didactic poem Phenomena, many comets herald a season of drought. And in Pliny's Encyclopedia Historia Naturalis, they herald severe winds and heat. And generally, a comet was a sign for the following years. For other authors, such as Virgil or the Stoic poet Marcus Manilius, comets are also portents of bad crops, diseases, pestilence, plague, and death, and civil discord. And it seems that this idea probably originated with the Babylonians. Similarly blamed wars and disturbed conditions on comets the famous Greek astronomer, astrologer, geograph Ptolemy, Claudius Ptolemy. In his Tetrabiblos, he mentions also weather indications from comets twice. First, when discussing the colors of eclipses, comets, and the like, there he says, comets are important because they produce the effects peculiar to Mars and Mercury, wars, hot weather, disturbed conditions, and the accompaniments of these. And then he gives some more information on like that through the time which they last, they indicate the duration of the events. Through their position relative to the sun, they show the beginning of the events, and so on. And the second place where he talks about comet is in the part on weather forecasting, where he says, of occasional phenomena in the upper atmosphere, comets generally foretell drafts or winds, and the larger the number of parts that are found in their heads, and the greater their size, the more severe the winds. And Ptolemy's name was mentioned in connection with predictions from comets, also with their description very often. But we have to say that partly for the writings that are probably not from him at all. I'm talking about the text De Cometis, which is a text on 9 comets and their significance. That was often added as an appendix to Centiloquium, which is a famous collection of 100 pseudo-Ptolemaic astrological sentences translated from Arabic into Latin. And the text De Cometis appears in Latin manuscripts in 2 main versions, and it is still not quite sure if it was translated from Greek or Arabic, as there are indications for both. In any case, the text describes 9 types of comets. Here you can see them depicted in a manuscript with a collection of astronomical and astrological texts written in Melk in Austria in the 80s of the 15th century. And you can see that every comet has a different shape. They have various colors and different comas, and some look kind of, especially the Veru looks kind of scary. And the names are also kind of enigmatic. I should mention that already Pliny has in his encyclopedia 9 types of comets and also some description, but the connection is not that obvious. So it's not really sure if there was some, if it's really connected through some intermediate Arabic sources, Greek sources, whatever, it's still a question, big question. The comets in decometes indicate changes in the world, wars, and so on, and also some weather. As an example of a weather indication can serve here the part on comet Matuta. It is a red comet with a long tail, which can mean drought, lack of rain, hunger, fires, wars, and so on. And there are hundreds of manuscripts where this text, Decometes, is an appendix to Centiloquium, and there are many others where it circulated separately. And it was also translated into vernacular versions. Here is an example of a German version from a manuscript written in Germany, in Augsburg, sometime shortly after 1464. And you can see here the first of the comets. Here is the other three, and here the last. You can see that they look totally different than from the previous manuscript. This one, the Matutina, the first one on this picture, that's the one that we saw. I can get back this one, but looks totally different. So I wouldn't recognize it as the same comet on the sky, I guess. But it's again red and it has long tail. But in these manuscripts, they are all pointing down, the tails. Probably he didn't have much space because we on this previous build here just on the bottom he had enough space, but otherwise they are all pointing down. Whatever. And coming back to the Decometes, it was also one of the many sources of other text, which is called Liber de Significatione Cometarum. It is a compilation written in Spain in 1238, and it's based on many sources, also on Centiloquium, Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos, on Alkindi, Sahala, Albumazar, and so on. And again, we don't know if it was originally written in Arabic or Latin. In any case, it is well informed about many of the phenomena that the authors observed in Al-Andalus, Egypt, and others. And it's also found in vernacular versions. Here, for example, in the 15th century French version. And here the second comet on the first folio. It's again this Matuta. It's written Aurora or Matuta, and it looks again totally different. So I think that the depictions would lead more to confusion than any help when you would try to predict something from them. I wanted to, here the second slide with them. Here the one on the right side with that's the sword, in fact. So very nice. And here the next. Yeah. And I wanted to show you also the 15th century German translation from the astrological volume from Strasbourg, 15th century. And on this folio is an introduction. Here you have two comets, which maybe you wouldn't guess are comets if it wouldn't be a text on the comets. And after introduction, there is also a part with the meanings of specific comets in specific signs of the zodiac. So here, for example, is the comet Pertica, as this word again, in the sign of Aquarius, which we see here. And here on the right side, some more examples of the comets. And already in the 13th century was this tradition of 9 comets integrated into the astrological compilations. As a first example can serve Compilatio de Astrorum Scientia, written by Leopold of Austria around the year 1271. It is a summary of astrological knowledge covering different areas of astrology, including weather forecasting. And this manual is divided into 10 parts, devoted to several branches of astrology, including nativities, finding answers to certain questions, or determining the appropriate time for specific activities. And his text was well known in the Middle Ages, 30 copies surviving in Germany alone. He is writing on comets in a separate chapter, the Cometa, which we can see here. And first he states, in accordance with Aristotle, that a comet is a product of exhalations. Then he is mentioning John of Damascus, a theologian according to whom comets are made and dissolved by God as a sign of the death of kings. And here, Comete sunt novem, begins an extract of Pseudo-Ptolemy's De Cometis, but he left out all the weather indications. And then he adds specifications on comets in specific signs. This comes from Albumazar's De Conjunctionibus Magnis. So, for example, when a comet is in the sign of Aquarius, it can mean darkening of the air. So something like the air now in Trento and in Prague as well, totally dark and gray. It can also mean thunder and lightnings. And when it's in the sign of the fish, it can mean, according to region, it can foretell a lot of rain. Later in his work, Leopold mentions comets in the chapter on weather forecasting. Here in this yellow part, he says that the comets and meteors, soup is meteor, mean always draft, depending on their number and length of the space. So he bit contradicts himself, because when in the fish it could mean a lot of rain, but here he says it means always draft. Okay, this confirms the fact that he was a real compiler. In the chapter on weather forecasting, he combines a lot of methods, beginning with astrological rules. Then there are some atmospherical signs, among them clouds or rainbow, including also etymologies and meteorological theories. He lists also the rules forecasting from thunder from the beginning of the year, then come back to atmospherical signs again, but from some other sources collected. And he doesn't really care that much. He just lists and summons the rules from the different sources together without any linking or commenting. And not long after Leopold, sometime after the year 1282, the famous Italian astrologer Guido Bonatti, I guess a well-known person to you, wrote his work Liber Introductorius ad Judicia Stellarum. And similarly to Leopold, he deals with comets in 3 parts. First drawing on Albumazar, in the chapter on what can be predicted from the position of comets in the zodiac during the revolution of the year, during the beginning of astrological year. But here is nothing regarding weather or climatic conditions. Then in the chapter on comets, he is drawing from Pseudo-Ptolemy's Cometes. And then in the part on weather forecasting, in a chapter on heavy rains, where he repeats Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos, that again, comets, when they appear, will signify winds and the dryness of the air, especially if they appear almost cloudy or nebulous. And the strengths of their significations will be according to the multitude and scarcity of them, and their length and shortness. And next, I would like to move to Firminus de Bellavalle, Firmin de Beauval, and his work, titled in Old Prince as Opusculum Repertorii Pronosticon in Mutationes Aeris tam via Astrologica quam Meteorologica. This is not a very well-known work. It was written by a not very well-known person, but in any case, it is interesting. It is an entire work just on weather forecasting, and as the title suggests, it uses astrological and meteorological science as well. The astrology greatly exceeds, but still the section on meteorology is quite extensive. And it is included at the end of the file as a 7th section, including a passage on comets that stems from Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos and its commentary. Another example is a work by an Oxford author belonging to the so-called Merton group, John Ashenden. Here is an author of astrological predictions based on a series of eclipses and conjunctions that turned out to be correct. And their success, as he says, motivated him to write a great work, Summa Judicialis de Accidentibus Mundi. It's a sum of astrological knowledge concerning large-scale events and weather, divided into 2 parts, 2 tractati. One is about general principles and predictions. The second about more detailed weather prediction and related hunger, mortality, and so on. He writes on comets in both tractati, in the first generally, where he again mentions the 9 comets of Pseudo-Ptolemy, together with a part on comets in specific signs of zodiac. And he mentions comet also in the second Tractatus, which is organized into distinctions according to predicted natural phenomena. So he mentions comets every time as related to the phenomenon in question. And this tradition made its way also into the practice of forecasting and weather forecasting, as evidenced, for example, by the annual prognostications. Here is an example of such forecast written by philosopher and doctor and astrologer Blasius of Parma for the year 1405, which was one of the first annual prognostications that has survived. And he says that it was a type Pertica, and that the comet means mortality and drought and wars. Funny thing is that the editor of the prognostication, Alexander Thiel, mentions that the comet probably wasn't a comet at all, as it's not mentioned in any recent comet catalog, but perhaps a meteor, a falling star. And with weather forecasting from comets, we're dealing also the commentators on Meteorologica, because as we have already seen, the question of their origin was connected with the question of their meaning or eventual influence. As an example can serve the commentary by Nicole Orem, which we have in a great edition, and which has 3 questions dedicated to comets as signs of phenomena, dedicated to comets. That in general, it can be said that the commentators understood comets as signs of phenomena in the sublunar region, but in a different way than the heavenly bodies, because they are made of the same material principle as the sublunar phenomena, the hot and dry exhalations. And it also shows Aurora Panzica in her new book that should be published any moment now, I think. And I'm very thankful to her for sharing her research with me. For example, Nicole Orem says in his commentary that the events predicted by comets are not necessary, but only probable, and that they are the task of the astrologer, not the philosopher. And variable are the commentaries for their explanations of significance of comets. For example, they say that the comets function as signs of two kinds, that they have a general meaning that is common to all of them, and a special meaning in which one comet differs from another. And by this, they solved to a certain degree this contradiction that we saw at Leopold of Austria with the dryness and then a lot of rains. And the topic of comets was also the subject of the quadrilateral disputations on the universities, where we find references not just to commentaries on meteorology, such as the one by Robert Grosseteste, Albertus Magnus, or Nicole Orem. Well, Grosseteste wasn't exactly a commentary on meteorology, but he wrote on the comets and was also mentioned a lot. But also references to encyclopedias, which mention comets as signs as well. For example, Isidore of Sevilla in his etymologies, or theologians. We already mentioned the John of Damascus, but also they mentioned this Ptolemaic tradition mentioned before, Ptolemaic and pseudo-Ptolemaic as well. Now I have there some examples from the Czech lands. For example, a question discussed at one of the Prague quadlibets. It was presented in 1417 at the quadlibet of Prokop of Kladruby and was addressed to one Czech astronomer, mathematician and physician, Christian of Prachatice. And we don't have his response, but what we have are the arguments prepared by the quadlibetarius, whose task was first to lay the question to one of the masters, and then at the disputation react to respondents' answer with counter arguments in order to start a discussion, to start a debate. And in this case, the quadlibetarius prepared counter-arguments for all possible answer choices. And the interesting thing is that in the case of this question, the arguments are divided into 6 sections, although usually the quadlibetari prepare just two parts with arguments against a positive answer and against a negative answer. So just to show how complicated the question was and related the philosophical and astrological part. So first come the arguments he has prepared for the case that the respondent takes the view that comet is not of celestial nature. Then follow arguments for the assertion that comets do not portend mortality or pestilence. The third section is prepared for the case that the respondent would say that a comet is an elementary phenomenon. Sounds pretty much the same as the first part. The next one for the case that according to the respondent, comets are of celestial nature. Next are the arguments convincing of comets as signs of pestilence, of mortality. And then come arguments for the case that the respondent expresses the belief that the comet is not of the nature of the elements. So I'm not going to explain the arguments, that would be for another paper, but just quickly, I wanted to show you another passage on comets from another question, which asks, among others, whether the conjunction of planets influences comets, meteors, halos, rainbows, and other phenomena. It is from the discussion deck volleyball organized by Master John Hus, which is an important person in the Czech lands, in 1411. And the response was written again by an astronomer, by Zdeněk Flabon. And in the part on the comets, the respondent summarizes the opinions of his predecessor, including Aristotle and Seneca. And he mentions also that the comet is understood as a star also by Isidore of Seville. And at the end, Zdeněk Flabon also subscribed to the view that comets originate in the hot exhalations and are associated with the influences of the individual planets. So here again, you see the part from the Pseudo-Ptolemies, the cometis. And last is a question here, whether the comet, which indicates earthquake, poor harvest, and unquestionably also the future mortality of mankind, is of elementary nature. This anonymous text includes only conclusions. The unnamed author, in fact, presents arguments to prove first that a comet which indicates an earthquake doesn't indicate a mortality, because it is just an effect caused by the ignited hot exhalations. However, in the next part, the author claims that comets are not elementary because they last longer than meteorological phenomena. They do not change their appearance. They move in circles while objects consisting of elements move up and down. And the final point in this question leads to the conclusion that comets signal neither earthquakes nor reduced fertility, nor the mortality, because Pliny and Aristotle regarded comets as having the same nature as the Milky Way, which never signals such event. So these were the examples from the Czech material, from the Czech lens. And that's what I would like to focus in the future now, to compare the other European material from the quadlibets, because the way they collect the references, the arguments from different sources, and later they add also observations and the judgments. So I would like to see if there is some really development in the theories also introduced in the quadlibets. And now to get to my conclusion, because I think that the time is up. It is evident that comets were regarded in different texts, philosophical, astrological, more as meteorological phenomena, I guess mainly because of their irregularity and impermanence. On the other hand, because of their unpredictability, they were regarded as prodigies and connected with the planets. And in this, they are unique in terms of prognostications, prognostication in general, and weather forecasting as well. And at least to me, extremely interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, really, for this beautiful overview of this tradition of weather forecasting, and with a focus on comets.